Hello and welcome to the Scientology Money Project on YouTube with your host, Jeffrey Augustine. Today we're doing part 2 of my 3-part series on why L. Ron Hubbard did not create Scientology. Now, to recap on our last episode, part 1, we talked about Hubbard's influences when he was in Oakland Naval Hospital, where he studied the works of Sigmund Freud. Obviously, he studied abreaction therapy, trauma reduction. He did study the works of psychiatry and psychology, and this includes hypnotic regression, because Freud did use hypnotic regression originally as his psychotherapy method and abandoned it later in favor of free association. So obviously we'll show how Hubbard came to adopt these elements. The thing I said about Oakland Naval Hospital is L. Ron Hubbard admitted to impersonating a naval doctor and also experimenting on patients, as we see here in this slide from Scientology's own website. So L. Ron Hubbard would have been court-martialed, should have been court-martialed under the Uniform Code of Military Justice for impersonating a doctor, practicing medicine without a license. Keep that in mind, because the practicing medicine without a license is not, Oakland was not the last time. So we said after Hubbard left Oakland Naval Hospital, instead of going north to Puget Sound in Washington State to his wife and 2 children, he headed south to Jack Parsons' boarding house in Pasadena, California, where he took up the occult works of Aleister Crowley, Thelema, and he practiced sex magic with Jack Parsons in their infamous Babylon working. And also, I offered the opinion, and I strongly believe that L. Ron Hubbard was a practitioner of Goetia or black magic. So that's a summary of part 1. Part 2, we're going to do some different things. L. Ron Hubbard was just on the verge of launching Dianetics on May 9, 1950. But before he did it, I wanted to show you something that's so interesting. We're going to expose one of L. Ron Hubbard's dirty little secrets. And he had many. In fact, this is a big dirty secret. This is really interesting. This is from a Scientology website. The letterhead is from L. Ron Hubbard because it says L. Ron Hubbard. So that's plenty of evidence there. He was then living in Savannah, Georgia. As you can see, P.O. Box 1796, Savannah, Georgia. This is a letter dated April 13, 1949, about 13 months before the launch of Dianetics and Modern Science and Mental Health. It's to the Gerontological Society, Baltimore City Hospital, Baltimore, Maryland. And there's L. Ron Hubbard's library card because Church of Scientology wants us to make sure we know that L. Ron Hubbard had a library card at the Savannah Public Library in Savannah, Georgia. I don't know why, but this is important. But in this letter, which I'll post on the show notes and post the actual PDF of my blog, Hubbard says he's working in private research. He gives Gerontological Society at Baltimore City Hospital the impression that he's a medical doctor working and he's researching as a medical researcher. And he's talking about traumatic experiences in prenatal, birth shock, infant illnesses, etc. You can read the letter. The first thing we highlight is L. Ron Hubbard writing, quote, an extensive investigation of the early work of Freud was undertaken and revealed certain premises. So this is L. Ron Hubbard's first person admission in writing. It's evidence that he extensively studied the early work of Sigmund Freud. So there's a data point where we can show that he'll later migrate it into Dianetics. The second thing that we read here, the dirty little secret, what we've highlighted here, Hubbard says, quote, by making changes in the practices of narcosynthesis and combining with certain techniques of hypnosis, I'm just going to leave it there. Narcosynthesis is the practice of using hypnosis and narcotics to treat trauma. It was a controversial technique. It's dangerous. It was used at the end of World War II in an attempt to treat trauma, or what we'd now call post-traumatic stress disorder, in American soldiers returning home from combat, the theaters of combat. And here we have Hubbard. He's not a doctor, but he's using narcotics. And in narcosynthesis, generally barbiturates were used. So a couple questions. Here we have L. Ron Hubbard practicing medicine without a license. And it's not just treating a head cold, it's using narcotics on people with post-traumatic stress disorder. Where does he get the narcotics? He's using hypnotism, which and he would later damn the entire practice of hypnosis even though he used it, he'd later damn it in Dianetics and Scientology. So in 1949, L. Ron Hubbard is telling the Baltimore City Hospital that he's using narcotics and hypnosis. He can't prescribe drugs, but again, he's practicing medicine without a license, and it's dangerous. It's very dangerous to do. So jumping ahead to Science of Survival, his second book written in 1951, Hubbard says, quote, "There's another form of hypnotism which falls between the surgical operation and straight hypnotism without physical pain. This form of hypnosis has been a carefully guarded secret of certain military and intelligence organizations. It is a vicious war weapon and may be of considerably more use in conquering a society than the atom bomb. This is no exaggeration. The extensiveness of this form of hypnotism and espionage work is so wide today that it is long past time when people should become alarmed about it. It required Dianetic processing to uncover pain drug hypnosis. Otherwise, pain drug hypnosis was out of sight, unsuspected, and unknown. This is the point of emphasis I want to make. Pain drug hypnosis is a wicked extension of narcosynthesis, the drug hypnosis used in America only during and since the last war, unquote. So, what's shocking, Hubbard damns the very thing, he damns narcosynthesis, the very thing he was using in 1949 on patients in Savannah, Georgia. He damns it only 3 years later in his second book, Science of Survival. He also claims that narcosynthesis was used by military intelligence services. He introduces the term pain drug hypnosis. And Hubbard would later say that was the basis of implanting people to cause pain in them and use drugs and hypnosis. So Hubbard was very familiar with the technique because he practiced it. We know that from the 1949 letter he wrote in Savannah, Georgia to the Baltimore City Hospital. So this is unusual. I just want you to keep that in mind, that Hubbard was not above using narcotics on people and hypnotizing them, only to later damn it. So this gets very sinister. This is a fellow who's willing to drug people and hypnotize them without a medical license. Normally, when narcosynthesis was practiced, and it was controversial, you had to have, the doctor that is, had to have an anesthesiologist present. Because what happened if the patient died? Look at all the fentanyl overdoses these days, the deaths. Hubbard was indiscriminately giving patients who had trauma and they were institutionalized, he was giving them drugs with no anesthesiologist present. What happened if one of them died? He was lucky he didn't kill anybody that we know of. And then what did he do? Later on, he would say that early experiments in narcosynthesis didn't yield any results. He would actually say that in one of his writings. Now, I want to share on screen more about narcosynthesis, which comes from the pages of Dianetics itself. So let me get that for you. Now, what I put on the screen, this is from Dianetics. And let me make it larger so you can read it. Again, this is from Dianetics, the highlighted section from L. Ron Hubbard. Quote, "There has been in recent years a practice called narcosynthesis. This was actually a branch of hypnoanalysis and deep analysis. It did not produce clears, and it did not even produce alleviation in the majority of its cases, but it was discovered to be an aberrative factor in itself." So he said narcosynthesis was studied. Several cases were examined on which narcosynthesis had been employed. Some of these cases had experienced relief from narcosynthesis. Others had become a great deal worse, unquote. So my point here is that L. Ron Hubbard was practicing medicine without a license. And in Dianetics, he refers to several cases without saying that he himself was the one who actually was practicing narcosynthesis. So this is a pretty interesting and incriminating, it's actually very damning to Hubbard. It's very damning to Hubbard that in this period, 1948, 49, he's actually using narcotics in an attempt to clear people, narcotics and hypnosis. That was part of pre-Dianetics that he dropped. He said narcosynthesis made people worse in some cases, which means he made people worse in some cases by giving people who were institutionalized for trauma, mental health issues, narcotics, and hypnotists. So I wanted to present this and emphasize the point that L. Ron Hubbard was a very dangerous man. He was actually willing to kill people by giving them narcotics when they had mental health issues, where they were suffering from PTSD. That shows Hubbard's flagrant disregard, just as he had experimented on people at Oakville Naval Hospital. Perhaps he stole drugs from the dispensary there to give his patients. We don't know. But I wanted to give you the real inside view from Hubbard's own words of how dangerous he could be in pursuit of what he thought he was the next Freud. He thought he was a medical doctor. He thought he was above the law. We don't even know where he got the barbiturates. It's very incriminating of Scientology. It's on Scientology's own websites and its own books. I'm not making this up. This is actual evidence that could be submitted in a court of law. It's proof. So let's go back to our stream slide deck. L. Ron Hubbard launches Dianetics on May 9, 1950. And in Dianetics, no mention of the E-meter is made. In his second book, Science and Survival, no mention of the E-meter is made. L. Ron Hubbard does not even know the E-meter exists. Another thing I want to point out, the volcano on the cover of the Dianetics we're familiar with was not put there until late 1967, early 1968, when the OT levels were introduced. So until Xenu, the body thetans, and the OT levels were introduced, Dianetics had this cover you see on the left-hand side. There were some variations in the cover art, of course, but the volcano does not get put in until he creates Xenu and the OT levels. Now, on this next slide you're looking at, it's interesting for a couple of reasons. We see on the left-hand side the Royal Table Pad Company over there on Pico in Los Angeles back then. It was advertising a 5-day special on asbestos insulated table pads. How dangerous that, back then when I was growing up, and I'm old, so we used to drink out of garden hoses, didn't wear seat belts. All the adults smoked cigarettes. It's such a dangerous world. Asbestos was in wide use, lead in paint. The world is so much better now in terms of human factors engineering, safety engineering. A writer made a comment, one of our viewers rather made a comment that maybe I overemphasize the importance of engineers, but engineering is good and I like it. But the safety factors, human factors are so much better. Back then you could buy asbestos insulated table pads. I guess if you had a fire in the kitchen or in the house, you could grab those asbestos insulated table pads and try to put it out. I don't know. But the Royal Table Pad Company has this big ad. And what I'm drawing your attention to is underneath there's a little cheap $3 newspaper ad here in the LA Times. And it's advertising L. Ron Hubbard and his appearance at the Shrine Auditorium. Let's bring it out here. Lecture by L. Ron Hubbard, author of Dianetics, Shrine Auditorium, $1, including tax, Thursday, August 10, 8 p.m. So that would have been August 10, 1950. So note to the time travelers in my audience, if you're traveling back in time, be sure to put down Thursday, August 10, 1950, 8 p.m. For only $1, you can see L. Ron Hubbard at the shrine. Now, if you're a time traveler, that would be worth taking in just as a form of spiritual tourism, cultic tourism, to go actually see the guy bloviating on stage about how you don't need your eyeglasses and how Dianetics is greater than the invention of fire, the wheel, the arch, etc. Now, the other article, here's what happened with Dianetics. Hubbard himself said that he thought Dianetics would sell about 5,600 copies, and he had created the Hubbard Dianetics Research Foundation, incorporated in Elizabeth, New Jersey. His second wife, Sarah Northrup, was on the board, along with Dr. Wenner and some other people. So they envisioned setting up, basically, they wanted to do for mental health what McDonald's did for fast food. They wanted to set up a franchise system of standardized Dianetics processing, because Hubbard's early adherents really believed in Dianetics, that it would be a thing, that it would become a franchise system, and the foundation would teach people how to become Dianetics auditors. They in turn would pay 10% to Dianetics Foundation, expand and grow. And this exact technique of Dianetics would revolutionize psychiatry, because it was so much better and faster in psychiatry. All of them bought into the model, Hubbard's model, that there was a reactive mind that contained engrams, that through Dianetics processing, which was done without a meter, again, I emphasize that through Dianetics processing, you could have people recall their traumas, or engrams, as they were called, and process them out to where they became the state of clear. So Hubbard was selling Dianetics to the American Psychiatric Association, which rejected it as pseudoscience and quackery. This article here by Wendell Weed, it's a great name, Wendell Weed. What is Dianetics? Poor man's psychiatry or quackery? That was how the debate was framed. Hubbard obviously did not like it, but look at the text. Want to toss away your eyeglasses, be free of colds, headaches, arthritis? Those are a few of the claims for the new science of Dianetics, which have been met by praise from some and by outright charges of hoax and fraud from psychiatrists and psychologists. Hubbard was doing public presentations at places like the Shrine Auditorium here in Los Angeles, which seats about 5,600 people. Meanwhile, columnists like Wendell Weed were covering it, asking, is it a poor man's psychiatry or quackery? Hubbard was up against an onslaught of criticism from the psychiatric and medical institution in America and abroad, and that became the basis for Scientology's hatred, intense hatred of psychiatry and psychology and all other mental health. Because what L. Ron Hubbard really wanted to attain was a monopoly on mental health in the world, and that's what he said. That's what he was really after. Here's the secret of Dianetics. This is it in a nutshell. Dianetics, early Dianetics, before a meter was ever used, was simply hypnotic regression. It was Freud's early techniques. Here you have a newspaper article. The photographer's photographing this fellow in Dianetic reverie. That's just another word for hypnosis. Hubbard would put people into a hypnotic state, and he would allow them to access their engrams. And here's the real framework of it. Freud and others believed, and many still do, that by putting someone into a hypnotic state, you can reduce their inhibitions and allow them to access the contents of the unconscious. So if you have some repressed trauma, if you were molested sexually, if you were attacked, if you were in a serious injury, or there's something that you're repressing in your unconscious mind, hypnosis would relax those inhibitions, allow you to bring them into consciousness in a hypnotic state where you could talk about them. They would become accessible to the therapist and to you, and you could be discussed. They weren't as dangerous. You could confront them and look at them under a hypnotic state. It's as if you had some distance from them that was clinically necessary. That was Sigmund Freud's early technique and justification for using hypnosis. And please, any psychiatrists, psychologists listening, please add amplifying comments. I'm obviously simplifying it. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm well read, but I don't have your level of expertise. So please add on in the comments. If you want to do a podcast, love to do a podcast with a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Slide we're looking at here, this fellow, he's yawning, he's going into his hypnotic state, and then he's grimacing, he's grabbing his knee, he's reliving the engram. His knee was injured at some point in his life. Maybe he was a degenerate gambler, didn't pay his bookie, they came around and popped him on the knee. Who knows? We don't know how he was injured. He could have slipped on a wet linoleum floor. The point is, he has an engram. That is a moment containing pain and unconsciousness related to his knee. So in his present lifetime, his knee is affected. It bothers him. So Hubbard said by putting him to a hypnotic state, which he called a Dianetic reverie, just propaganda is language by redefinition of words. By putting him into a hypnotic state, it would allow him to go back and relive the experience over and over and over, peeling away the layers of the onion until the engram erased. Freud called this catharsis, when you discharge the intense intrapsychic content or pain or trauma, when you relived it, re-experienced it, that power it had over you would erase because you would bring it to consciousness, examine it, and it would vanish. That's a familiar technique. Hubbard was simply calling it Dianetics. He had dropped the use of barbiturates, of narcotics, though there's still a mention of drug use in Dianetics, which is a different matter. It wasn't barbiturates, but so that's Dianetics in a nutshell. The newspapers of the time, the photographers, this is another article, another newspaper showing a woman under Dianetics reverie, reliving moments of pain and unconsciousness. So the method is the same. And here's another of Hubbard's inexpensive, cheap newspaper ads. How to get authentic Dianetic reverie. This shows the Dianetics Foundation setting up their schools to teach people how to do Dianetics auditing. And that would include how to hypnotize people, how to put them into a hypnotic state so that the patient, the text says, a new precise technique assures you that the patient is in genuine reverie, which is kind of funny to me because that's opposed to fake reverie, genuine reverie, and not a fake reverie. I don't know how you prove someone's in genuine reverie, but apparently Hubbard had the special magic to assure that a person was in genuine reverie. I guess they would obey hypnotic commands or something. But that's the technique, franchise system, teaching people how to do hypnotic regression, erase engrams, and get person into a state of clear. And once you were clear, you no longer had your reactive mind. You would have perfect memory, perfect recall, perfect health, etc. You would be clear. You would be free of your reactive mind. The story arc that I really want to get to, this is Dianetics, the story arc. 1950. L. Ron Hubbard is in a room in Los Angeles at the Casa de Rosas. It's a big old building he rented for the first Dianetics Center out here in Los Angeles. 1951, his second wife, Sarah Northrop Hubbard, divorces him in a big, messy public divorce that splattered all over the headlines across America. The Herald Express was back then a big LA newspaper. I grew up reading it. My parents subscribed to the Herald Express because they liked it better than the LA Times. That was a political thing back then, as newspapers tend to be. But I grew up reading the Herald Express. So that's an old LA thing for me. Wife of Dianetics founder asked divorce on cruelty grounds, claims systematic torture. So in addition to the media beating him for having this pseudoscientific quack therapy, Sarah Northrop's dragging him through the headlines. And at the same time, his first wife, Polly Grubb, pointed out to the press when she sued him. And Polly Grubb did sue L. Ron Hubbard for back child support. L. Ron Hubbard was a deadbeat dad. He was not paying any child support for his kids, his two kids in Washington State. That's to L. Ron Hubbard's discredit and shame, because nowadays he would have been locked up in jail, but he was a deadbeat dad. I want to make sure the audience knows that. So he's claiming to be the expert, and yet he's not paying child support, and yet he's bringing in a fortune, and he's taking a lot of that money out of the Dianetics Foundation. His son, L. Ron Hubbard Jr., would later say that Dad had shoe boxes full of cash under the bed, I guess in case he had to flee. So just as his second wife, Sarah, is suing him for divorce, his first wife suing him for back child support, and she points out his first wife, Polly Grubb, that's her maiden name, that L. Ron Hubbard was married to her when he married Sarah Northrop. So additionally, as has been pointed out many, many times, L. Ron Hubbard was a bigamist. He was a train wreck, a flaming train wreck in his personal life. And then in 1952, the Dianetics Foundation assets in Wichita were sold in bankruptcy. So there's a story behind that that's very interesting. So that's it. Dianetics was a craze, and by 1952, there was a bankruptcy. In her excellent book, Understanding Scientology, The Demon Cult, Marjorie Wakefield points out that L. Ron Hubbard's second book, called Science of Survival, sold only 1,250 copies in its first printing. Now, remember I said that Dianetics in its first printing sold 150,000 copies. So that's quite a staggering crash. And that shows you that the fad that was Dianetics, it just, it was like chia pets. It was just a flash in the pan, to use an old term. Because what happened, it didn't produce the results. People weren't getting rid of their eyeglasses. They weren't getting cured of cancer. Hubbard made so many ridiculous promises. Asthma, allergies, all kinds of things could be cured, and that wasn't happening. The system itself to go get training at the Dianetic centers was very expensive, and it didn't work. So aside from the problems of costing way too much money and not working, which are serious problems when you're trying to sell a product, it should work and it should be affordable. But his cost a lot of money. It didn't work, and there was a lot of controversy. So L. Ron Hubbard is finding himself on the edge of ruin and bankruptcy, plunge into obscurity at this time. I wanted to mention here this picture of L. Ron Hubbard having a woman under hypnosis at the Casa de Rosas. Your host, me, I did a show on the Travel Channel's Ghost Adventures with Zach Baggins and his crew at the Casa de Rosas in Los Angeles. It's called L. Ron Hubbard's Secret Laboratory. And I work with Zach. We went into the Casa de Rosa. It's still available online. You can go watch it. It's very entertaining. It was fun to work with Zach and his crew. They're just great people. And the Casa de Rosas, I'll tell you an anecdote. We go to the Casa de Rosas, and it's surrounded by a chain link fence because it's abandoned, dilapidated. It's a really hot day. So we go to the center courtyard, and there's a lemon tree in the center courtyard of the Casa de Rosa. And the caretaker comes out, and Zach and the crew and we are all there. The sun is setting, and the caretaker comes out and he says, okay, now you guys have free run of the place, but the owners made it quite clear, you cannot touch the lemon tree. Do you understand? You cannot touch this lemon tree or you will be asked to leave immediately. Do you understand? We say, yeah, we're not going to touch the lemon tree. So if you ever go to Casa de Rosas, don't touch the lemon tree. I don't know what'll happen. You could be pulled into another universe. The ghosts could get you, the demons. I don't know, but I did not. I just want you to know, I did not touch the lemon tree. It's like, I'm not going to go there. If the lemon tree is that bad, I won't touch it. So don't you be touching the lemon tree if you go there. You might be inviting all kinds of trouble. Dianetics 1950. L. Ron Hubbard wrote that life begins at conception. What happened is when he began to audit people, some people had past life recalls. And this was really an interesting thing in the Dianetics Foundation because there was a division in the leadership, the board, over past lives. In this section from Science of Survival, this quoted part, Hubbard writes, the subject of past deaths and past lives is so full of tension that as early as last July 1950, the Board of Trustees of the Foundation sought to pass a resolution banning the entire subject. And I have been many times requested to omit any reference to these in the present work or in public for fear that a general impression would get out that Dianetics had something to do with spiritualism. This is just amazing admission from L. Ron Hubbard. He does not want Dianetics to be equated with 19th century spiritualism, with past lives, ghosts, disembodied spirits, discarnate entities, spirit knocking, Ouija boards. He wants to be Dr. Hubbard, the revolutionary pioneer who brought a modern science of mental health to the world that was greater than the invention of fire. And yet he has these pre-clears, his patients, he calls them, coming up with past lives in past worlds, planets, galaxies, different places going way back. So Hubbard's trying to hold it together. And it's interesting because people are paying by the hour to get audited. He lets them run out their past lives. Why not? They're on the clock. But on the other hand, so what does Hubbard do? He wants to be a scientist, but he's also a secret occultist. We know damn well he's a secret occultist. And there's some really interesting evidence showing his occult fascinations in Science of Survival and his other early works, his other lectures. So you'll see plenty of occult references. So Hubbard doesn't publicly want to be known as an occultist or a spiritualist. Privately, he's way in on it. It has been probably since the 1930s. We know he was overtly into it with the Babylon working. So how does L. Ron Hubbard reconcile his problem of being a secret occultist who wants to be a scientist? And we're going to cover this and a lot of other things in episode 3. So I'll leave you with that. This is Jeffrey Augustine for the Scientology Money Project on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in episode 3.